make the ear, we're going to start with a magic circle. I'm going to tighten this up a little bit. And inside this magic circle, we're going to do 6 single crochets. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, number 5, and number 6. And we're going to tighten up our circle by pulling the tail. For our next row, we're going to do a single crochet and an increase all the way around. So we're going to do a single crochet. We're going to get our stitch marker. And then we're going to do an increase. And we're going to keep repeating that. A single crochet and an increase, single crochet and an increase. And here we should have a total of 9 single crochets. Then we're going to tighten up our circle a little more. And then in our next row, we're going to do a single crochet and an increase all the way around. So we're going to start with a single crochet. Get our stitch marker. And then we're going to do an increase. Then a single crochet and an increase, single crochet and an increase, a single crochet and an increase, and then we're going to end with a single crochet. And here we should have a total of 13 single crochets. And then we're going to pull our yarn through. We're going to cut enough yarn so that we could sew our ear on. So maybe 4 times as much. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this should be good. Let's pull the yarn through. And here we're going to skip 1 crochet and go into the next. And then we're going to go into the back loop of the original crochet. And we're going to make it all the same size so that it blends in. And then we're going to weave in our end. I think 2 is good. And then we're going to go out from the inside. And then we're going to sew on our ears. And we're going to make 2 of these. Now we're ready to sew the ear on. We have our yarn coming out, and I'm going to go back down into the next stitch. And then I'm going to go into the bee. So here are 5 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm going to go follow this middle stitch here and just go right up. So this should be the middle, and then I'm going to go down 1, 2, and then I'm going to go into this next stitch here. And we're going to start here. And so I'm going to go up the next stitch, and then down the next stitch. Then I'm going to go into the previous and the next stitch on the bee, and then I'm going to go up into that previous stitch, and then down the next stitch, and then in the bee I'm going to go through the previous and then the next, and then the ear, the same thing, the previous and the next stitch, and then into the bee, the previous and the next, then into the ear, the previous and the next, then on the bee, previous and the next, then back into the ear, the previous and the next, then into the body of the bee, the previous and the next, and back up to the ear, the previous and then the next, and then into the bee, the previous and the next, and then we're going back up into the ear, same thing, the previous and the next, and then we're on this corner and we're turning, so we're going to go into the previous and the next. Oops, let me attach this back on. And the same thing. So we're almost done as we keep going through the previous and the next. We're getting close to the end here, so I'm going into the next stitch on the ear, and then here is the previous and the next stitch on the bee, and then we're on our last stitch here on the ear, and then we're going to go into the bee, and then I'm going to go on this other side of the ear, and then back into these stitches to the other side, then I'm going to go into the body, then exit in one of the white spots. Yep. And our ear is secured. And then we're just going to press down, cut the yarn, and then we're done with the ear. And we're going to do the same thing for the other side. So for the other side, we're going to go from the middle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in this third stitch, the middle, and then we're going to count 1, 2, and then we're going to go into these 2 stitches for our third. And then we're going to sew on the ear, and we'll be going this way all the way around. So there'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 stitches between the 2 ears. And now we're going to add on our face. We have our 2 eyes and our nose. The eyes measure around 9 millimeters and the nose 7 millimeters. So here for the nose, we're going to put it right in the middle. We're going to get our glue. And then glue it on the back. And here we're going to place it on that middle stitch, the third stitch in the middle. And then we have our eye, and from the nose we're going to count 1, 2, 3, and then place our eye. We want to make sure that the bottom of the eye is at the center of the nose. And then we're going to do the same with the other eye. And here I placed the other eye. It's 1, 2, and I counted this as 3, 4 down. And then we're going to let them dry, and then we're going to work on our whiskers. So now we're going to do our whiskers. We're going to start with the middle whisker, with the middle of the eye, and we're going to go into this stitch here. And then we're going to skip 2 of these stitches and then go through. Then we're going to go back into that middle stitch and then go up 1. And then we're going to not go straight, but up 1. So right here under the ear, and then we're going to go down to 1 stitch down from the middle. And then we're going to go not straight, but 1 stitch down. And then we're going back up to the middle. And here we're finished with our whiskers. And we're going to tie a knot. So we're going to cut this and then tie the knot. Cut it even shorter. And then we're going to tuck in the knot. And now we're done with the whiskers on our right side, and then we're going to work the ones on our left hand side. And here we just finished with our left hand side of whiskers, and I'm just tying the knot. And now we're done with both sides of our whiskers. To make the foot, we're going to start with a magic circle. And then we're going to do 6 single crochets inside of our magic circle. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, number 5, and number 6. Then we're going to pull our tail to bring the circle together. Next, we're going to do 2 rows of 6 single crochets all the way around. Here is our first single crochet. We're going to add our stitch marker. And here is our second, our third, fourth, fifth, and our 6th single crochet. Then we're going to put it the right side up. Then we're going to grab our tail and pull it so it closes a little bit more. And then we're going to start on our next row. So for this next row, we're going to do another 6 single crochets. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, number 5, and number 6. And then we're going to pull out our yarn. We want to have enough so that we could sew this onto the body. And then I'm going to cut the middle one so it doesn't get in the way. And then we're going to grab our darning needle. Here is our darning needle. And then we're going to remove the stitch marker and we're going to make the fake little crochet. So we're going to skip one, go into the next, and then down into the back loop of that original crochet we started out. And then we're going to make sure that it's all the same size as the other stitches, and then we're going to weave in the end. And then we're going to go out one of the stitches, and then we're going to sew it onto the body. So now we're ready to sew our foot onto our bee, and we're just going to sew them flat on the side like this. So we're going to put this in the row after the 7th stitch. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we're going to go into this row right after it. So I'm going to go into the next stitch on the leg, and I'm going to go all the way down. So I'm going through the leg here, and that'll flatten it. And then I'm going to go into these 2 stitches on the bee. So I'm starting from right to left. And then I'm going to go up into the next stitch on the leg. Go into that stitch. And down this next stitch on the leg. And then into the body. And I'm going into the next stitch on the body. And then I'm going up the next stitch on the leg. And then down into the body. This should be our last stitch. And then I'm going to go across back to the starting. And I'm going to go into this end of the leg, and then back into the body, and then I'm going to go to the front again. And then I'm going to go into the next stitch on the body and back down. And then I'm going to go into the leg on the corner stitch here. And then into the body and just right down so that we could cut our yarn. Then we're done attaching our little leg. It should look flat like this, kind of almost like a wing. And then we're going to attach another one on the black stripe, and then we're going to do the same on the other side. For the wing, we're going to make a 1-layer round wing. So we're going to start with a magic circle. And then we're going to do 8 single crochets in our magic circle. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's number 7, and number 8. Then we're going to pull our tail to bring all of our crochets together. For our next row, we're going to do an increase in each of the crochets. There's our first single crochet. And then we're going to do another crochet in the same stitch for that increase. Then we're going to continue making our increases in every single stitch. So we should have a total of 8 increases, which is 16 single crochets. Here we're on our last crochet with our last increase. And here we should have a total of 16 single crochets, and we're going to tighten up our circle. And then we're going to move on to the next row. For the next row, we're going to do a single crochet and an increase all the way around. So we're going to start with a single crochet, and we're going to add our stitch marker. And then we're going to do an increase. Then a single crochet and an increase. We're going to continue to do this until we get to the end of the row, and then we'll meet back for the next row. And here we're on our last single crochet and an increase. We should have a total of 24 single crochets. For our next row, we're going to do the same thing, a single crochet and an increase all the way around. So we're going to start with a single crochet, add our stitch marker, and then we're going to do an increase in the next stitch. There's 1 and 2 single crochets in the same stitch, and then back to a single crochet and then an increase. And we're going to keep doing a single crochet and an increase all the way around until we have 36 single crochets, and then we'll meet back to finish up our wing. And here we're on our last single crochet and an increase. And then we're going to finish off our wing. We're going to cut just enough so that we can sew it onto the body. And then we're going to pull our yarn through. And here we have the darning needle. We're going to skip a stitch, go into the next stitch, then back into the back loop of the original stitch. Then we're going to make the stitch blend in with the others, and then we're going to weave in our end. We're going to go through the stitch here. That's the first one right under where we ended, and then we're going to go into these stitches so that it's not too visible, since we'll be seeing this side of the wing. And here we went 3 stitches. Let me go through one more here. So we went through these 3 stitches, and then we're going to go outwards because we'll be sewing on the wing. So we'll sew on this portion of the wing to the body. Here I have the Hello Kitty Bee, and I've already sewn on one side of the wing. So here's the other side, and we're going to sew it right next to this wing. And here I placed it in the middle, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches on the head, and I just followed the 3rd stitch, which is in the middle, and it would be this stitch here, and that's where we're going to sew on this wing. So the other wing is right next to it. So here's the wing, and I'm going to place it right here. So it's going to be sewn on like this. So I'm going to go into this stitch on the wing, and then I'm going to go into the stitch here that's in the yellow. And then I'm going to go back up into that stitch that we just came out of, so the previous stitch. And then I'm going into the next stitch on the wing. And then we're going to go to the next stitches on the body here. And then we're going to go into that previous stitch on the wing and into the next stitch. So then coming from the other side, this side, to the other side, we're going to go into these stitches here, the next set of stitches on the body. And then we're going to go back into that previous stitch on the wing and then into the next stitch. And then from the back to the front, we're going into the next stitch on the body. And then we're going into the previous stitch and the next stitch on the wing. Make sure it's nice and tight. And then we're going to go through one more set of stitches. That's in the yellow here. And then back into that previous stitch. On the wing, and this will be our last stitch. So then I'm going to go into the next stitch on the wing and into those same last stitches we were in, and I'm going to go to the back of the wings. And here I'm going to go through the yellow stripes, and then we're going to cut the end off. Or we can just tuck it in since it's pretty short. So then it looks something like this when it flies. This is optional, but you can also make a tail, which I think would finish off our bee. So we're going to start with a magic circle. And then we're going to do 6 single crochets. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 single crochets. Then we're going to pull all of our stitches together. And then in the next 3 rows, we're going to do single crochets all the way around. So here is our first row. There is our first single crochet. Then our second, our third, fourth, fifth, and our 6th single crochet. So here we're done with 1 row, and we're going to put it the correct side up. And I'm going to tighten up the circle a little bit more. And now we're going to start on our second row. There's 1. We're going to add our stitch marker. There's 2, 3, 4, number 5, and number 6. And now we're on our last row. There is our first single crochet. We're going to add our stitch marker. There's number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and number 6. And then we're going to pull our yarn through. Remove our stitch marker, and here we can just tuck this in rather than cut it off. And that's the tail for when we started the circle. And now we're going to get our darning needle. Skip a stitch, go into the next stitch, and into the back loop of that first stitch. And then we're going to weave in this end. Just going to try and find some stitches there. And here we have enough yarn to sew this on, so I'm just going to go out. And then here I have the bee, and I'm going to just sew it right here in the middle. So I'm going to go into this next stitch on the tail. And then I'm going to go into the stitches on the bee. Then I'm going to go back up into the stitch on the tail and down the next one on the tail. And into the next stitches on the bee. So this is the middle, and this is the one row from the middle. Then we're going to go into the previous and the next stitch on the tail. We're going to go into the next stitches on the body. And get stuck on the foot. Then into the previous and the next stitch on the tail. And into the next stitches on the body. These are good. Into the previous and the next on the tail. And the previous, then in the next stitches on the body. Then the previous and the next stitch on the tail. Then into the next stitches on the body. And this is the end, and we just want to tighten everything. And then we're going to go back into the stitches and then through the body. This should hold the tail in place. We're going to cut the end. And here we're done with adding the tail to our little bee. Now we're going to work on the bow. We're going to start with 10 chains. Here's our slip knot. And then our 10 chains. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and number 10. And then we're going to do a chain 1 for our single crochets. We're going to start with a single crochet. And in our next stitch, we're going to do a double crochet. And then another double crochet in the following stitch. And then we're back down to a single crochet. And then we're going to do 2 slip stitches. So here's our first slip stitch. And then in our next stitch, our second slip stitch. And then we're going to move on to do a single crochet. We're going to do exactly how we did on this side, but just going the other way. So now we're going to do 2 double crochets. There's 1, and then our second double crochet. And in this last stitch, we're going to do a single crochet. And then we're going to turn around, and in that same stitch, we're going to do another single crochet since we're starting a new row of those stitches. So in the next 2 stitches, we're going to do double crochets. So here's our first double crochet. And then in the next stitch, another double crochet. And then we're going down to a single crochet. And then 2 slip stitches. There's 1. And then 2 slip stitches. And then a single crochet. 2 double crochets. There's 1. And 2 double crochets. And then we're going to end here with a single crochet. We're done with our bow, so we're going to finish it off. We're going to cut our yarn. Let's pull it through. Get the darning needle. And then we're going to skip a stitch, go into the next. And then we're going to go to the back loop of the first stitch. Make sure the stitches are matching and the bow is shaped right. And then we're going to weave in our end. Then we're going to cut the tail. And we're also going to weave in this end. And then cut the tail. And here we have our bow. And now we're going to make the middle. For the middle of the bow, we're going to start with a magic circle. And inside the magic circle, we're going to do 6 single crochets. There's 1, 2, 3, number 4, 5, and 6. We're going to pull out our yarn. And then bring all of our stitches together. Make sure it's nice and tight. Then we're going to cut the end. Pull it out. Then we're going to get our darning needle. And we're just going to connect it with the next stitch. And then down the first stitch. And then I'm going to place this end into this upper stitch here. And then I'm going to take this end and I'm going to place it to the opposite stitch of the other side of the other tail. So then they're right across from each other. And now we can tie this around our bow. Here we have the bow. Straighten this out a little bit. Then we're just going to tie it right in the middle. And here I'm going to cut off the ends because I'm going to be gluing the bow on. And now we're done with our Hello Kitty bow. Now we're going to make a small flower. We're going to start with a magic circle. And then we're going to do 2 chains. There's 1 and 2 chains. So here there's actually a total of 3 chains. There's 1, 2, and 3. And then we're going to go into the magic circle and do a slip stitch. And then we're going to do 3 chains. 1, 2, and 3 chains. And then we're going to go into our magic circle and do a slip stitch. And then we're going to do 3 chains. 1, 2, and 3 chains. Let me pull this magic circle a little bit closer. And then we're going to go into the magic circle and do a slip stitch. And take a guess what we're going to do. 3 chains. 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to go into the magic circle and do a slip stitch. And then back to 3 chains. 1, 2, 3 chains. And then we're going to go into the magic circle and do a slip stitch. And here we can see that we have 5 petals. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we're going to pull our tail to bring all of our stitches together. And then we're going to pull our yarn through. Mine was at the end already, so you might have to cut your yarn. And then I'm going to pull this a little bit more to make the circle smaller. And then with the tail here, we're going to get the darning needle. And we're going to go into this chain. And then we're going to weave in this tail. So I'm just going to weave it into the middle stitches here. And I'm going to make this hole a little bit smaller by pulling the tail. And here we have our flower. And this and the 2 tails here, we can just cut them off. Oops. And tie them together. And then I'm going to make a knot and then cut the tails. And then we can sew on this little flower. And now we're going to make an even smaller flower. We're going to start with a magic circle. And then we're going to do 1 chain. And so it's actually 2 chains because of the magic circle. Then we're going to do a slip stitch into our magic circle. And then 2 chains, 1, 2, and then a slip stitch into the magic circle. And then 2 chains, 1, 2, and a slip stitch into the magic circle. Then 2 chains, 1, 2, and then a slip stitch into the magic circle. And then 2 chains, 1, 2, and then a slip stitch into the magic circle. And here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 petals. So we're going to pull our tail to bring all of our petals together. Then we're going to pull our yarn through. We're going to cut it. And then we're going to get the darning needle And here we have our darning needle, and we're going to go into the stitch on the petal at the bottom. And then we're going to weave the end through on the circle. So I'm going to pull the tail a little bit more to close the circle up. And then I'm going to weave the tail through. And then I'm just going to tie both of them together. And make a knot. And then I'm going to cut the tails shorter. And then we can glue this on to our bee. For the yellow flower, I'm going to make the middle pink. So I'm just going to make like I'm making a knot, and I'm just going to pull the strand around a couple times so that it's nice and thick and looks like a bigger knot, and it won't go through the middle. So I'm going to get the darning needle and going through the middle here. And taking the other end and going through. You can actually use these if you want to sew it on. And then cut it. And then we have the middle. And then we're going to do the same for the pink one. Here we have yellow. Then we're going to wrap the strand around a couple times, and then that'll make a larger knot so it doesn't go through. And then we're going to get our darning needle and sew and place the ends through. And then tie a knot. Cut the ends, and then we're done with our pink flower. And we're going to place these onto our bee. Here we have our bee, and we're going to add our bow first. Let's get our glue. Here we have our glue, and we're just going to put some on the back. And a little bit on the head. And then we're just going to glue that on. And then we're going to get our two flowers, add some glue on there. And then I'm going to put the smaller one on the bottom, right in here. And then we'll allow them to dry, and we're done with our bee. Thank you so much for watching my tutorial on crocheting a Hello Kitty into a bee. I hope you'll be able to make one. Feel free to leave any questions or comments in the comment section. If you found this video useful, please hit that thumbs up button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. Also, hit that notification bell so you know when our next video is out. Have a great day.